Storytelling, we're on here. This video is something I think radical. I'm not really sure. I did a cursory search on this, but the Crusades, the Templars, and all of that, I don't think is Catholic. I don't think it's Catholic Church history. I think it's Protestant. That's my claim. And hear me out, because we're always putting the two together, and Protestants, it seems, are always dogging the Crusades and the Templars and the witch trials and all that stuff. And I'm like, this stuff rocked. This stuff helped set the foundation of our church culture that we're so comfy in today. And these guys fought and died for something back then that we attached to the Catholic Church that we know today, and that is not the case. And I've even come across in my For the Lord RPG games that someone wanted to do a setting where they wanted to put the Templars in an evil light, and I'm like, no, I don't. That's not a good thing, because in Jerusalem. And I'm like, but there's so much evil there in the Islamic, the Islamic Caliphate, and the terrorists and the killings. I don't know why you put the Templars as some sort of, like Assassin's Creed conspiracy theory, when if you actually look at history, the Templars are not Catholic history. They're not part of the Catholic Church. All right, let's just check this out. Let me just cut to the chase. Think about the Protestants. Martin Luther didn't start till 1517 or something, 1500s. So the Protestants, the Protestant church itself didn't even exist till after 1500, 1600, 1700. So why are we saying the Templars and the Crusaders are Catholic? Because we as Christians were part of that church until 15, 16, 1700. We didn't have the need to branch off, because of we claim the Catholic Church has fallen away from the Bible, and it was being corrupted and all that. And I'm sure it started 1300, 1400, 1500, and it took a while for the Christians to see it across Europe. Remember, things travel slowly in Europe, right? In history, things take a while to change. My one best example is the English longbow was the counter to the French noble plate armor, and wiped out a bunch of French nobles, and it took them 100 years to finally counter that. So if the French nobles, who are all it took them 100 years to counter the English longbow, which was right across the ocean, and they had encountered over and over in these battles. My point being that history takes a while to transition. You don't just start with Martin Luther and his 99 Theses and then suddenly we're Protestants. I don't think his intent either was to separate out from the church and become a Protestant, separation from the church and denomination. My point being is that the church before then, the Templars and the Crusades and all these individuals were following a theology closer to what we believe as Protestants. I mean, that's my claim. I'm not trying to argue with Catholics here. I'm just trying to say that we Protestants, we should really look back at history and go, oh, wait a minute. These guys were doing stuff based off the teachings of the early founders of the church. And those teachings are pretty good. Also, we need to understand too that from 700 to 1000 AD, there was no education system, right? There was no foundation of being able to read the Bible quickly and easily, because most people didn't necessarily learn to read, right? Just in the common denominator of it all. And so having schools and universities and all that was not a commonplace thing. The church built those, and the church built a society that was educated so that we could read the Bible. And 1500, 1600, 1700, that's the culmination of people being able to have access to the Bible. Remember, and it being printed. It wasn't printed until I think Protestants decided to do it. With the printing press was invented for the Bible. The first book ever made was the Bible. I don't know. Is that a clue that God is real and the Word of God is real and everything that the white Christian Europe expounded upon? The reason too that we're attacked as white supremacists and white racists, white blah, 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 is because of Jesus Christ, not because of our race. They hate Jesus Christ, and it's written in their DNA, their coding, that they gotta fight, and they gotta use every tool, every bear false witness they can So they're just calling it white supremacists, white, you always see they always attack Christian nations. They never attack China or Russia, or African nations or Marxist or communist or Islamic, they never, resoundingly attack them. They always flood the Christian nations, right? Europe and America, which happen to be white. They always flood them with their agenda. Never Islamic. They might do a little pittance there and there, but never. It's all about Jesus Christ. All right. So I want to get to a couple of quick things here, just to explain this to you. This is the Muslim invasion of the Iberian Peninsula, and I did these timelines here. I asked whatever AI to give me the timelines. I just need the basics of it all. Began in remember, Islam started at what, 650 or whatever? It was pretty quick, and then immediately they're starting to conquer with warriors. All right, Islam is, and they've already went up to Iberian Peninsula, being Spain. Began in 711, and by 730, so 20 years later, they're already near Paris down here. 730. They're already near Paris. So this shows you their continual attack on Spain, which is all Christian. It was all early church Christian, which their theology, by the way, and I will get to this book to show you in a minute, was completely, I believe, pretty accurate. I mean, I don't know. We'll see. I mean, I know there was heresies. I don't want to. I don't really deal with heresies at the moment. I'm dealing with because the early church was struggling theologically, sure, but the theology was there, was growing, was maturing. The ability to read and understand the Bible, because remember, we still hadn't had public schools yet, or private schools or Christian schools yet, and so the people that were learning were very, it was very narrow areas of where people could actually learn and read and study the Bible. Anyway, my point being that this attack nearly wiped out Christianity. Remember, they had taken Africa and the Middle East within less than 100 years from Islam starting. From Islam starting, less than 100 years, from 650 to 700 or whatever, 50 years maybe, they had conquered with their slave armies of Islamic warriors, raped and pillaged the 2/3 of Christianity, of Christendom, because Africa had Christians and Middle East had Christians. And I don't want to go into deep theology with who were the best Christians. I just want to get to the point where we have to understand Christians all across the Middle East, Africa, and Europe were being wiped out by Islam, by the conquest and the brutal terror and torture of Islam. And I remember reading a detailed thing about the original beginning attacks of Islam into Spain. They would do betrayal and deception to beat the Christians. They would use there was no nobility in their confrontations in war. There was one where the Muslims would allow the Christians to come across the river so they would fight on the battlefield. Well, as they were in the middle of the river, the Muslims came out and started just shooting them with arrows and killing them all. So it wasn't even a battle. Also, the Muslims had African horses, like stallions, Arabian Mustangs or horses or whatever, and I believe they had the stirrups, so they rode into battle fighting on horseback, whereas the Christians didn't have that. They didn't have stirrups, so they didn't really have saddles, and so they never used they used horses for transport, but they never understood the whole concept of the saddle. And that is a big part of what created the Knight. The Knight came after this, and this is like an epic story where Charles Martel. This is an epic story that is never being told because Hollywood can't tell this story because they're too afraid, and they take the knee to terror. All the amazing, brilliant, wonderful Hollywood filmmakers and artists who have their independence in minds take the knee to Islam. They will never do a movie about Charles Martel, which is an incredible historical changing point in the struggle against the onslaught of Islam. This battle too is incredible. I read stuff on it, and they were on foot. They were, I don't know if they were outnumbered, but they were out. The Islamic army was a professional army, 24/7, 365 days. In other words, the Christians only did war during the summer, and then during the winter they took it off and did all their farming. So they were never professionals at it. The Muslims were a warrior caste system. And when they say there's peaceful Muslims, I forget that. Peaceful Muslims are a useless term. They're slaves to this warrior caste. they don't rise up and fight against their terror and Islam and whatever. So whenever you say there's a peaceful Muslim, I don't care. I'm being hyperbolic here, but I mean seriously, I don't care. Well, I care in the sense that they're still evil, they're still wicked because they're taking a knee to Islam, just like the left is and Democrats and pagans, and that's why you see them flooding the West with Muslims. They're taking a knee to Islam. That's in their DNA. I'm a Calvinist. God wrote wickedness in their hearts. They have to do everything they can to hate God and Jesus, and bringing Muslims in comforts them, even though they can see the terror and the suicide that they're committing. Why? What is any other answer to this? Why is the left and Democrats bringing in Muslims? Why? Everyone knows what Muslims do and the belief of Islam: to kill the unbelievers, force slavery on everyone, kill Israel. Why do we allow them to come here? It's like 200 times in the Quran, which is a very small book, kill the unbeliever. It's not talk to, debate, or convert in an open debate. It's kill. And anyone that leaves Islam, if you're born in Islam, if you leave Islam, you too are sentenced to death. So this amazing battle, Charles Martel, and this is an amazing story too, because in the story, he brings up old veterans. He brings them to help him because they're going to change the way they fight and become a professional army. Like, so he has to bring up old veterans, like brings the band back together. You know, like it's almost like it's the Magnificent Seven story, kind of, because he brings some veterans in who then bring in all these, young newbies that don't know how to fight, and they have to fight the Muslims. And it was an incredible, weird battle of, blessings and luck. And I mean luck in the sense of Christian luck, that they were able to even defeat them at this battle, because the Muslims had horseback. They had all kinds of, thankfully they had arrogance, in this battle. And this battle was the one that stopped the further intrusion into Western Europe, because they had taken over Spain pretty much. There was some surviving places, but they take over Spain. I read the biography on El Cid, which was pretty amazing and crazy and corrupt and all that. So there was all that. Darn it, someone's calling me right now. Hold on. Okay, so this is amazing. This story. I got my hands here. This is amazing. Now, the Crusades. I want to get to the Crusades. So one big thing about the Crusades that you all don't need to realize is that the biggest percent of Crusaders that started the Crusades was from France, was from Poitiers, that area, because they knew who Islam was. They knew. So the Crusades started at 10, right? And then pretty much ended 1000 AD, and pretty much ended, all this stuff, 1100 AD or whatever. No, I'm sorry. Let me go here. The Great Crusades. It ended around 1200, 1200, 1300, 1200 here. At the end of 1200 AD. Okay? So, and the Crusades here is really detailed, which is not necessary for this discussion. But lots of harrowing stuff in these stories. But all against Islam, the terror of Islam, and the betrayals, and all this amazing stuff, and that that the Hollywood is too afraid to tell. This story is more epic than the Westerns, than anything. But Hollywood can't tell this story because of Islam today. Will threaten death. If you make any of these kind of movies today, you will be threatened with death. So we are silencing it. And Assassin's Creed video game is taking the knee to him and saying that the Templars are evil, Crusades and Templars. And that's why we're failing as a church. Because as Protestants, I think we should study these guys, like, as part of just our church history. They're part of our church history. And I'm frustrated as a, medieval history guy, who the church history is one where we save the West. Catholics, Protestants, I don't care anymore. I'm sick and tired of this rift, because we have bigger problems, and let's let the priests and pastors argue over all the details. I get it. I will not pray to Mary or the saints to pray for me to God. I get it, but everything else, they're good with us. Pro-life, pro-moral, pro-family. That's enough for me right there. Honor the mother and the father. You know, if we would only, for crying out loud, just work together, we can have our debates with Catholics in a very civil manner. That's not our problem. It's the pagans and the Democrats and the Muslims. That's our problem. They're gonna take away our freedom to debate. They're taking away our freedom for Protestants and Catholics to debate each other. And yes, I understand there was a war between Catholics and Protestants, but it only lasted a few hundred years. You know, and then we realized how bad that was. Everything Christians do, we kind of get sucked into, like slavery or like fighting each other, but we don't do it for 2,000 years like the pagans do, the Democrats do. We do it for a few hundred years. We, you know, like the English longbow, we realize how bad it is, and we chill. You know, we get over it. And that's what happened. The Catholics and the Protestants really only fought from 1600 to 1800. If you think about it, right? The real meat of that rift and violence and blood and all that. Because after 1800, 1900, we don't really, there's no like huge, you know, sweeping up of Protestants or Catholics and wiping them out. I mean, I understand there was the IRA, the Irish thing, but that was small, minor in one area, and it had a lot to do with politics as well. Anyway, whatever. Y'all get my point. My point is, so the Templars, look at this, 1000 AD, they end at 1300 AD, and their ending was through the Catholic Church, which at this point we consider to be getting corrupt, right? The Protestant, it takes a couple hundred years for Martin Luther and some others to start saying that. But think about this. From here to here, I mean, there was no Protestant movement. You know, there was heresies, but there was no Protestant movement. I understand there was heresies, and there might have been some in there that were more accurate or whatever, but the big movement of Protestant doesn't come until 1500. And I would say the corruption of the church and that became that, you know, we know as the Catholic Church today doesn't really happen till then. And obviously, my view, me saying corrupt, I'm not attacking Catholics today. I'm just saying the rift that we had. Anyway, also, Hail Mary, the Mary prayer to Mary, was not finalized until 1600-ish. Okay, so even that, praying to Mary was not in the early church. You know, and praying to saints, there was no saints to pray to because we haven't had saints yet. The saints were actually people living and doing their stuff, which is what we Protestants believe today. We believe today the saints are us, the saints of the church serving the church. We don't believe that the saints are someone in the past who we then can pray to, which is what the Catholic Church is doing now, which we don't believe in that. Anyway, the point being, the Roman Catholic Church back in the day, we'll get to this book here, is probably more aligned to our theology of Protestants than we realize. And these people, remember, these people are not, these Templars, these Crusaders, they're not theologians, they're not apologetic, there's no apologetics. There's no, you know, they don't have the luxury of information that we have today to be Protestant or Catholic or whatever. They loved the Lord and wanted to serve the Lord, and this is the language they knew, right? Medieval battles, the language of force, the language, it's not an educated culture at that time, so they served the Lord and felt the righteousness of the Lord through their sword, through their culture of protecting their land, protecting their king, whatever. But they felt that they were serving Jesus Christ. And this is the way they felt they were serving Jesus Christ. Okay, so I want us Protestants to be a little more open to the Templars and the Crusades and even the witch trials, because there was no Protestant church at that time. Okay, all right, the Protestant timeline. Look at it, began in the 16th century. Martin Luther posted this thing in 1517. I'm assuming too that he formally begins the Protestant Reformation, but I'm assuming he wanted to stay in the church. You know, I don't know. I should know the details of this, but I don't. He debates the people, Scripture alone. Yeah, he's trying to say that Scripture alone is the basis for Christian faith and doctrine. Okay, and not the church stuff, the Christian nobility of the. Okay, so all this stuff is him struggling and fighting with the church to try to get back to the Bible, and then of course the Catholic Church, being fighting back and stubborn or whatever, and then became this separation. So why are we then putting everything before that into the Catholic Church? because obviously a lot of people left the Catholic Church, and so the Templars and the Crusaders, they never had this option. They never had this awareness, and they probably had plenty of good scripture in their past that they didn't need to do what Martin Luther did. So that's my point. And granted, I haven't studied that, but I'm just looking at this from the basic view that, look, the Protestant Reformation didn't start until 1500-ish, 1600s, 1700s. So why are we then giving the Catholic Church all the credit for the Templars and Crusades, who helped save Christendom? That can't be argued. They helped stop the Islamic conquest of the last third of Christendom. In order to do that, you have to get thousands and thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of Christian men to do that, and to become violent, to become sacrificial violently and bloodletting, and to stop the flooding of Islam. And I'm just bummed that we disregard the Templars and Crusades and what they did. These people died for us. They died for the church. They died for the wonderful cathedrals and churches and parishes all spread out throughout Europe that we love to go to the markets and the Christmas markets and all these things that we used to love and adore in Europe were made because of these men fighting to the death, the Templars and the Crusades. And we disregard that now as Protestants, and I just find that to be a bummer. So I'm not going to do that personally. I think I'm going to now own the Templars and the Crusades as part of my church, my Protestant church. And I'm going to tell everyone in my church and everyone to not be ashamed, because I am so glad and grateful that they risk their lives. And guess what? Islam calls us Crusades today, us Protestants. Whenever we go and try to stop any of their Islamic horrors, they call us Crusaders. And okay, witch trials. The witch trials obviously is, obviously it's throughout history. The Inquisition against the heresy established by the Roman Church. Okay, so 1230s, that's before Protestants started. And actually the witch trials does go through Protestants, and there is a big Protestant movement of witch trials. And again, I believe those trials look at today. Look at what pagans are doing today. Look at the abortions, look at the sexualizing, the grooming, look at all that. The witch trials would stop that right in its tracks if we had witch trials today. I do believe it went a little weird and got off because, witchcraft is vague. Witchcraft is anything a woman wants to pretend it is or isn't. So that's why it's so hard to pin it down. But obviously it's throughout history. And to me, it's not, we don't call it witchcraft, but we call it something. We call it abortion. We call it rape drugs. We call it whatever manipulation they want to do. Cursing, the hexing. They still hex today. I used to watch Bill O'Reilly, who was a big Fox guy when Fox News was beginning, and when I became conservative, and he's still doing it online. You all know Bill O'Reilly. Anyway, he had on a religious advisor that talked about, and this religious advisor was sort of a moderate, whatever, this woman, I forgot her name, but whatever. But she'd come on once every couple of weeks or so and talk about religious aspects. And she had that smarmy voice, like she's so academic. Well, she ended up writing a biography after he had already left and whatever. And she her last brouhaha, write a big biography before she got not famous, before she was forgotten. And she admitted in there she does hexes. She was a religious commentator for the Bill O'Reilly show about New York City, because she was sort of in the noble elites of New York and Washington, D.C., talked about the rich and famous of that circle. And in her book, she admitted to doing hexes to try to hurt and destroy or murder someone, and that person ended up suffering. And it was like, she wrote it in her book. My point being, they do hexes even today. There's witchcraft going on today. There's that pagan stupidity going on. And the word hex to me, like hexing someone, isn't even something I know. until I heard about that, and then I started looking in, and then I'm using it now for my role playing game. But I couldn't believe this white, and she was like a white liberal woman, elitist in New York, Democrat, acting all like she's moderate. But it was like, oh my gosh, these people know this as common, rolls off their tongue quite naturally, hexing people. And you can see now Hollywood, and even Babylon Hollywood, and today's Hollywood, there's witches, witchcraft. It's all fun and silly, fun and games until somebody gets sacrificed. But this is just a colorful commentary on this. It doesn't necessarily have to do with my whole thing I'm talking about here. But my point being, all of this, including the witch trials, in my view, is our church. We get the Templars, we get the Crusades. The Catholic Church doesn't, because the Catholic Church that we are butting up against is the one starting around 1600 or 1500 or 1400 that Martin Luther was criticizing. He was not criticizing the one from 1200 or whatever. Oh, so let me get to this book. Long before Luther, by Nathan Busenitz. He's at my church. He walks around there. He wrote this book, and it's about the early church, tracing the heart of the gospel from Christ to the Reformation. Now, anyway, let me just read a couple things here. I'm just going to read the chapter headings here a little bit. Part 1, the reformers in justification and invention or recovery, regaining biblical clarity, clothed in Christ's righteousness. Okay. Part 2, the church before Augustine, saved by grace. He's discussing things that we believe as Protestants that the early church wrote readily. Justification, the divine declaration, the great exchange. Okay, Augustine in justification, a forerunner to the reformers. The doctor of grace. Okay, the doctor, not doctrine, but doctor of grace. It's a chapter heading. I don't know. The church after Augustine, pardon from sin. Okay, okay. Anyway, here's some quotes by early church fathers. I didn't even prepare this. I just looked. I'm just going to read some of the shorter ones I can find here. Fulgentius of Ruspa, 462 to 533. The Blessed Paul argues that we are saved by faith, which he declares to be not from us, but a gift from God. That's Protestantism. We don't need sacraments or anything else or confession. We are saved by faith, and it is a gift from God. Thus, there cannot possibly be true salvation where there is no true faith, and since this faith is divinely enabled, it is without doubt bestowed by his free generosity. Okay, let me read another one here. Adolphonsus of Toledo, 607 and 667. Behold, he, Paul, preached the beginning of faith, which, when it is in Christ, is justification for the believer. God, who makes the unclean clean and removes sin, justifies the sinner apart from works. Apart from works. Okay, so it's not works that does it. I'm just reading these short ones here. Marcus Eremita, 5th century. The kingdom of heaven is not a reward for works, but a gift of grace prepared by the master of his faithful servants. All right, let me move around. Let me see. I'm going to find another shorter one. He's got a bunch of here, like Theodoret, Julian of Toledo, Beatty, 673, 735. The Apostle Paul preached that we are justified by faith without works. Simeon, the Neo-theologian, Anselm of Canterbury, which is 1000 AD. Augustine of Hippo, 350 to 430. Jerome, 347 to 420. These are just things that are just, that help understand the Protestant. John Chrysostom, 347 to 407. Basile of Caesarea, 329 to 379. This is perfect and pure, boasting in God, when one is not proud on account of his own righteousness, but knows that he is indeed unworthy of the true righteousness and is justified solely by faith in Christ. And Paul boasts that he despises his own righteousness, seeking that righteousness that is on the account of Christ, which is the righteousness of God by faith. Okay, Ambrosiasters, 4th century. Ambrose. Hilary of Poitiers. Poitiers, I didn't read this one. Wages cannot be considered as a gift because they are due to work. But God has given us free grace to all men by the justification of faith. So that's a Protestant thing. We are Calvinists. We are saved by God's faith, not or in grace, or our faith, but by God's grace. Justification of faith means that, or at least I'm going to say it means this. It means that our outward, the way that we know that we are saved is our outward appearance of faith and our how we our fruits and all that. But God decided to save us and gave us the grace to be saved and created who we are that would want to be saved. Anyway, let me just keep on. I'm saying that terribly, but that's okay. It disturbed the scribes that sin was for the same guy, Hilary of Poitiers. It disturbed the scribes that sin was forgiven by a man, for they considered that Jesus Christ was only a man. It disturbed the scribes. Okay. And that sin was forgiven by him, whereas the law was not able to resolve it, since faith alone justifies. Because faith alone justifies, publicans and prostitutes will be the first in the kingdom of heaven. God bestows his pardon for all our faults according to his mercy, literally by his own gift, rather than our merit. Okay? So these are all quotes here. There's even more here. Rome, the Apostle John. These have been written, John 20:31. These have been written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. Anyway, more quotes, Bible quotes, and of course, a bunch of footnotes here because that's what we academics believe in. But this book is all about the early church and how we Protestants fit well with the early church. And he has quotes from up to 1000 AD, which is when the Crusaders and Templars were starting their things. And I'm assuming that after 1000 AD, it started getting to be more, the Catholic Church started getting to be more, like many institutions, becomes more about the institution than about the belief, than the core values that they started. That happens a lot with any institution, including Protestant churches. Plenty of Protestant churches go corrupt. The strength of the Protestantism is that we don't have a centralized power. We are all separated out. And the New Testament says there's going to be false churches. There's going to be many false prophets and false Christians. False prophets are false pastors. And so the New Testament says that. In Revelations, it says that. In Jude, it says that. It's going to, in all it says there are going to be many false Christians. Ergo, many false churches. I'm not claiming who they are, except Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses. But the Catholic Church has a lot of problems. I love the Catholic Church, but here's the thing: I love the Catholic Church because I coined Crusaders, Templars, the early monks and monasteries with the Catholic Church. But that's what I love: the early medieval history. And now I'm starting to realize, wait a minute, we Protestants get to have that too. We get to have that cake and eat it too. We get to own that as part of our church history. This is what he's claiming. Long before Luther, there was plenty of founding fathers of the church whose theology was very close to ours, very good. And I think around 1500 it got lost. So the Crusades and Templars are in this time period. So I'm very curious to see more research done on that by Christian historians, Protestant Christian historians, I guess. I don't know. But I'm not here to fight the Catholic Church, the modern Catholic Church. I have no desire to. It's unnecessary, I think. If the pastors and priests want to go at it, that's fine. We can have some fun debates there, and they'd be fun. They would be civil, I would say. That's not our problem right now. Our problem is not them. The problem is the Democrats, the pagans, the atheists, the evolutionists, and their militant wing, the Islamic Empire. That's our problem. We need to fight that. We need to rebuke that. Our biggest problem is how weak our churches are. I'm not threatened by a bunch of Catholic churches everywhere. Doesn't bother me. Protestants, we can pop. If Catholic churches everywhere, we Protestants can pop up our churches too. Problem is, if there's a bunch of mosques everywhere and a bunch of NGOs everywhere, we Protestants will not survive. So as you all know, I have these games: Dark Ages role-playing game, Pulse of the Epoch role-playing game, Crusader Space role-playing game, Biblically Adherent. If you all want to do a Templar or Crusader setting, feel free. I'm thinking about it myself, but I want to say we can own and claim Crusades, Templars, witch trials, because we actually do the witch trials, as part of our church history. If we can claim these founding men as part of our church history because of their theology, the Templars and Crusaders, who don't have as good theology as them, but followed the theology of the day, is part of our church history. All right. Woo! Long-winded babbling of joy. In the game of life, please check out my games. They're on my website, and they're also on Amazon. I also have Alfred, the book series, which is on Amazon. Alfred, the Boy Will Be King. I also have this. Night of the Dead. There's 4 of these on They're epic, very gory, very violent. Night of the Dead. What's the back? Night of the Dead. That's right, modern dude with medieval armor. Oh, there's the helmet too. The helmet that's on this cover. Because I know how to, and I describe the night fighting zombies very in gory detail. In gory detail. It's all in Hollywood too. Series. I got 4 of these. There's another one here. Where is it? I think there's 4. Or is there only 3? I don't know. Anyway. Oh, here's my Alfred. This is the Volume 3, Quest Nights. This is adult, man. If you're an adult, you will enjoy this too. The cover is kind of anime. I just like the cover, the art that this lady did, and so I just went with her for all the covers. But it's an adult with kid. It's a kid, but it's an adult. The first book, Alfred 1, is a little more kiddie-ish, but then after that, I kind of, I started getting more mature in my writing, storytelling. I'm working on Volume 6 on that right now. Pretty epic, and I'm at 71,000 words. So I'm getting there. All right, in the game of life, everybody, roll holy dice.